I had never felt more humiliated in my life. The grand ballroom, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a string quartet, suddenly seemed too large, too empty. I had been to countless weddings in my life, but this one, DIL's wedding, felt different. It felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't seen her this happy in years. Maybe it was the lavish display of wealth. The flowers, the intricate decorations, the guests, all carefully chosen to show off just how well her life had turned out. But for some reason, as I stood in the back of the room, watching her, I felt like an outsider, like a shadow at her own wedding. DIL had been my best friend for years. We had grown up together, shared secrets, and supported each other through every phase of life. We were inseparable back then. But over the last few years, things had changed. She had changed. And that night, at her wedding, it became clear just how much. I took a deep breath and tried to push the thoughts away. It wasn't about me tonight. This was her big day. She was getting married to a man who seemed to have it all. He was successful, charming, and rich beyond measure. They were the perfect couple, at least on the surface. And as much as I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, I couldn't help but compare my life to hers. I looked around the room, feeling increasingly out of place. Most of the guests were people I didn't know, people from her new life that I had never met. I felt the weight of every eye on me. Was I still her best friend, or had I just become a distant memory? I told myself it didn't matter. This night wasn't about me. But the more I tried to convince myself of that, the more the doubt crept in. It wasn't until dinner started that things took a turn. I had just taken my seat at one of the long tables when I noticed DIL walking toward me. She was stunning, of course, glowing in her wedding dress. But there was something in her eyes, something that wasn't quite right. When she reached me, she smiled, but it felt forced, almost like she was trying too hard. "Hey, Sarah," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud. "How are you doing?" I smiled back, trying to mask the unease I felt. "I'm doing great, DIL. This is such a beautiful wedding. Everything looks amazing." "Yeah," she said, but her tone shifted quickly. "Listen, I wanted to say something. I know we've been distant lately." My heart sank. I didn't know where this conversation was headed, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to be a pleasant one. "DIL, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "We're here now, that's what matters." She gave me a tight-lipped smile and glanced over at her new husband, who was busy talking to some of the other guests. Her gaze quickly returned to me. "It's just, I don't know how to say this, but you've changed, Sarah. You used to be fun. You used to be the life of the party, you know." I blinked, surprised by the accusation. "I'm still fun," I said defensively. "I'm just going through some stuff." She shrugged, almost dismissively, as though she didn't care for the explanation. I know, but still, it's like you're different, like you're not the same person anymore." I didn't know how to respond. What did she mean by that? Was she implying that I was boring? Was I somehow not living up to her expectations? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, her eyes suddenly shifted, and I saw a look of pure disgust cross her face. And then, before I could fully process it, she said something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "You know, Sarah, you're really just a fat pig now." The words hung in the air, the sound of them reverberating in my ears. Fat pig? She had just called me that. My best friend, the person I had trusted with my deepest secrets, had just called me a fat pig. The room seemed to freeze around me. The music, the chatter, the clinking of silverware, it all faded into the background. The words repeated over and over in my head, "Fat pig, fat pig." I looked at her, my mind racing, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. Was this really DIL? The person who had been there for me during my worst times? The person who had comforted me when I felt unworthy? The person who had always told me I was beautiful, no matter what? The tears threatened to fall, but I refused to let them. I couldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. But I could feel the sting in my chest, the burn of humiliation starting to spread throughout my body. You're joking, right?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. DIL didn't smile, she didn't apologize, she didn't even look guilty. She just looked at me with cold eyes like I was nothing more than a nuisance. "No, Sarah," she said, her voice harsh. "I'm not joking, I'm just telling you the truth." The truth. I felt my world shatter in that moment. She was telling me the truth, The truth about what? About how I looked, how I wasn't good enough, how I had let myself go. The pain of her words hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just the insult. It was the fact that I had trusted her, loved her like a sister, and now she had reduced me to nothing more than a label. A fat pig. I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned away from her, feeling the tears burn my eyes. I could hear her voice behind me, calling my name, but I couldn't face her. Not now. I didn't care about the rest of the wedding. I didn't care about the lavish decorations, the beautiful gown, or the smiles on everyone's faces. I didn't care about any of it. The only thing I cared about was the hurt I felt, the betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I walked out of the ballroom, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't understand what had just happened. DIL had been my best friend for years, and now, in front of everyone, she had humiliated me. No one had ever made me feel so small. As I stood there, trying to get control of myself, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dad. "Just checking in. How's everything going, kiddo? I'm proud of you no matter what." The words were simple, but they were enough to make me feel a little less alone. I wiped my eyes and texted him back. "Thanks, Dad, I needed to hear that." But it wasn't just the words that comforted me. It was the realization that I wasn't alone, that I didn't need DIL or anyone else's approval to be worthy. I didn't need her to tell me who I was. I knew who I was. And no one, not even my best friend, was going to make me doubt myself again. I walked back to my car, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were racing. I couldn't stop replaying DIL's words in my head, but as I drove home, something inside me began to shift. The anger was growing. I wasn't angry at myself anymore. I wasn't angry at my body or my appearance. I was angry at her. How dare she? How dare she try to tear me down after everything we had been through together? And just as the tears started to fall, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her define me. I wasn't going to let her words, or anyone else's, control my worth. This was my life, and I was going to take back control. The following days felt like a blur. I was still reeling from the wedding, from DIL's betrayal. But I knew I couldn't let this consume me. I couldn't let her poison my mind any longer. I started working on my goals again. I made a plan to focus on myself, not on losing weight or changing my body, but on changing my life. I was going to invest in myself, in my confidence, in my happiness. I was going to do it for me. And one day, as I sat at my desk, typing out my plans for the future, I realized something important. I didn't need DIL's approval. I never had. The woman I was becoming was strong, independent, and capable. I wasn't the fat pig she had labeled me. I was more than that. I was a woman who had been through hell and back, and I was still standing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been hurt by DIL's words. I wasn't the only one who had felt the sting of her cruelty, but I was going to be the one who rose above it. I was going to take control of my future and make sure that I never allowed anyone to treat me like that again. I wasn't the woman who had been put down. I wasn't the woman who allowed herself to be belittled. I was Sarah, and I would never let anyone, not even DIL, take away my power. This was just the beginning. The days after DIL's wedding were the hardest. I walked around in a daze, replaying everything she said to me over and over in my head. Fat pig. Those words echoed in my mind, taunting me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but think about them. I felt small, invisible, and I wondered if I had truly let myself go. I could hear DIL's voice in the back of my mind, criticizing every inch of me, pointing out the flaws I had worked so hard to ignore. But something inside me shifted that night. After the wedding, after I had driven home alone, I had done a lot of thinking. I cried, yes, but in between the tears, something sparked. It wasn't anger, not at first. It wasn't even rage. It was something deeper, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time, determination. I had spent so many years thinking I wasn't enough, thinking I had to change myself, be something I wasn't, to fit into some mold of what I should be. But after DIL's words, something broke inside me. I realized I didn't need to be anyone else. I wasn't going to hide who I was for her or for anyone. I didn't need her approval, and I sure as hell didn't need her permission to feel good about myself. The next morning, I woke up early, my head still buzzing with everything that had happened. The sun was barely peeking through the window, casting a soft glow on the room. I lay there for a while, trying to catch my breath. I felt heavy, like the weight of the world had been placed on my chest. But as I lay there, I also realized something. I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't let this insult, this betrayal, define me. I had spent too long allowing people like DIL to tell me who I was. I had spent years trying to please others, trying to live up to an image that didn't belong to me. But that ended now. Today, I was going to take control. I stood up and walked into the bathroom. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see the fat pig DIL had called me. No, I saw something different. I saw a woman who had been through the ringer but was still standing. I saw someone who had fought for everything she had and was ready to fight for herself now. I washed my face, put on a bit of makeup, and dressed in something that made me feel good. I didn't care if I looked perfect. What mattered was how I felt, how I was going to feel when I walked out the door today, knowing that I was in control of my own life. Work didn't feel like work that day. It was as if I was walking through a fog, just going through the motions. I wasn't thinking about DIL. I wasn't thinking about Mark. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by the people who had hurt me. I was thinking about myself. I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. It was only when I sat at my desk, looking at the calendar on my phone, that I realized how much time had passed since I had done something just for me, since I had truly thought about what I wanted out of life. I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I was living for myself. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. I didn't know what I was doing, but I needed to do something. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello," a familiar voice answered. "Hey, it's me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I've been thinking about starting something, a business, I mean." The silence on the other end felt deafening, but then she spoke. "Sarah, you've always had that spark. What's stopping you?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "I don't know, fear, I guess. Fear of failing, fear of putting myself out there. But I'm done with that. I want to do this. I want to help people. I want to make something of myself that isn't dependent on anyone else." There was a pause, and then she spoke again. "Then do it. Don't wait for permission. Start today." That conversation marked the beginning of something new. It was as if everything had aligned in that moment. I started researching, planning, and organizing. The idea of a business didn't seem so scary anymore. I wasn't afraid of the work involved. I wasn't afraid of the risk. What I was afraid of was staying stuck, staying in the past. I didn't want to be the woman who let other people's opinions define her anymore. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself, on my business idea, and on rebuilding my life. I made a plan. I found resources, looked for courses to help me improve, and slowly but surely I began to carve out a path. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But every step I took felt like a victory. I also started making time for myself again. I began going to the gym, not to lose weight, but to feel stronger. I started walking more, getting outside, and enjoying the simple things I had neglected for so long. I had always let work and family take priority over my own happiness, but now I was making time for me. But things weren't all smooth sailing. There were days when I felt like I was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The self-doubt still crept in. I still heard DIL's voice in my head, calling me a fat pig. But every time I felt myself slipping, I reminded myself that I was more than the insults. I was more than her words. I was capable of so much more, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. One evening, I sat down at my desk and opened the laptop. I had been putting it off for a while, but it was time to take the first real step in making my dream a reality. I started writing down my goals, breaking them into manageable chunks. I didn't know exactly how I was going to achieve all of it, but I knew one thing: I had to try. I took a deep breath and hit send on the first email. It was a simple inquiry, but it felt like a mountain had been lifted off my chest. The days continued to pass, and slowly I started seeing progress. I landed my first client. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The first step toward something bigger. I couldn't believe it. My dream was becoming a reality. But even as I celebrated, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. I wasn't just building a business. I was rebuilding myself. And every day I had to remind myself that I was capable, that I was worthy, that I didn't need anyone else's approval. Not from DIL, not from Mark, and not from anyone else who tried to tear me down. A few months later, I found myself at a networking event, standing in front of a room full of strangers. It was intimidating, but I didn't back down. I introduced myself, told them about my business, and shared my vision. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of what I was doing. By the end of the evening, I had made several new connections, and one of them even offered to invest in my business. It was a small step, but it was enough. I was building something real, something that mattered. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the fear of failure seemed too big. But every time that fear crept in, I reminded myself of why I was doing this. I wasn't just doing it for me. I was doing it for Jake. I was doing it for the woman I knew I could become. I was doing it for the life I wanted to live, a life where I was free, where I wasn't held back by anyone's expectations. And as I stood on the stage at my first business conference, speaking to a crowd about my journey, I realized how far I had come. I had taken control of my life, and I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. I wasn't the fat pig anymore. I was a woman who had fought, who had risen from the ashes, and who was ready to make her mark on the world. The truth was, I was stronger than I had ever been. I was capable of achieving anything I set my mind to. And no one, not even DIL, could take that away from me. As I looked out at the audience, I knew one thing for certain: I had found my voice. And I wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. The days that followed DIL's wedding were a blur, as though I was living in slow motion, watching the world move around me while I remained stuck in place. I hadn't cried since that awful moment. Instead, I felt this strange emptiness, as if the pain was too heavy to express. All I could do was keep moving, one step at a time. But the heaviness of the betrayal still weighed on me. I couldn't get over her words, fat pig. It was like they had been branded into my mind. Every time I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw them written across my face. It didn't help that I had spent so much of my life being told I wasn't enough. Growing up, I was always the bigger girl, the one who didn't fit in with the so-called ideal. My mother always told me that I was beautiful, that I should love myself. But as I got older, it felt like the world never stopped reminding me how much I didn't measure up. DIL was supposed to be different. She was supposed to be the person who never judged me, who never made me feel small. But here I was, humiliated at her wedding. And the worst part? She didn't even apologize. She didn't even look guilty. She just walked away, leaving me to digest the hurt on my own. I had never felt so insignificant. That morning, after the wedding, I woke up early. The silence in the house was deafening, and I realized just how alone I felt. Mark was gone, as he had been for a while, and it was just me and Jake. My son, who was 12, had always been a little more sensitive, and I could see that he was worried about me. He knew something had changed in our home, even though I tried so hard to shield him from it. I made breakfast, the usual scrambled eggs and toast, trying to distract myself. But the weight of everything, the hurt, the betrayal, the loneliness, was like a shadow I couldn't shake off. As I set the table, I glanced over at Jake, who was quietly sipping his juice. He was looking at me with his big brown eyes, filled with that innocent concern that only a child can have. "Mom," he said softly, breaking the silence, "are you okay?" I looked at him and smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm fine, just tired, that's all." He didn't look convinced. "Are you sure? You don't seem okay." I sat down beside him, taking his hand. "I'm just going through some things, buddy," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "But I'll be okay, I promise." He didn't say anything else, but I could tell he was still worried. I didn't want him to carry my burdens, but I also didn't want him to think that I was okay when I was. He was growing up so fast, and I knew I had to be strong for him. After breakfast, I decided to go for a walk. The air outside felt fresh, like it had washed away some of the weight that had been on my shoulders. I walked slowly, my mind drifting back to the events of the last few days. I thought about DIL and the hurtful words she had said. But as much as I tried to hold on to my anger, something inside me told me that I had to let it go. Holding on to that resentment would only hurt me in the long run. I had to forgive her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I couldn't carry the pain of her betrayal forever. I stopped at the park and sat on a bench, watching the children play. They ran around, laughing, carefree. A little part of me wished I could be as carefree as they were, but I was. I had responsibilities, a son to raise, a life to rebuild, and I knew I couldn't do it by staying stuck in the past. It wasn't about DIL anymore. It wasn't about what she had said or how she had treated me. It was about me. It was about what I needed to do to move forward. And in that moment, I realized something important. I had the power to change my own life. No one else had that power. Not Mark, not DIL, and certainly not the world's expectations of who I was supposed to be. Over the next few days, I began to focus on what I could control. I started by taking care of myself, really taking care of myself, for the first time in years. I signed up for a gym membership, something I had been putting off for far too long. But it wasn't just about losing weight or changing my body. It was about gaining strength, about doing something that made me feel good about myself. I also started making time for things I had neglected, like my hobbies. I loved painting, something I had put aside when life got too busy. I dug out my old brushes and canvases and spent hours in the evening painting what I felt. It wasn't about making something perfect. It was about expressing myself, about letting go of the stress that had been building up inside me for so long. But most importantly, I started focusing on my career. I had always worked hard, but after Mark and I split, I realized that I had been putting too much of myself into trying to make him happy. I had let his success overshadow my own ambitions. I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to build something for myself, something I could be proud of, and I knew I was capable. A week later, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop with an old friend, Lily. We had known each other for years, but we hadn't been in touch as much recently. When she reached out to me to meet for coffee, I jumped at the chance. I needed someone to talk to. When she arrived, I was a little nervous, but seeing her familiar face made me feel better. She smiled warmly as she sat down. "You look amazing," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You've been doing something, haven't you?" I shrugged, trying to play it off, just focusing on myself, trying to get back on track. She raised an eyebrow. "That's not the whole story, is it?" I laughed, a little self-conscious. "Okay, maybe not, but it's a start." She smiled again, her eyes full of understanding. "You've always been strong, Sarah. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're going to get through this. I know you will." Her words meant a lot to me. They reminded me of who I used to be, the woman who didn't need anyone's approval, the woman who could take on the world. I had let that part of me fade for so long, but now it was coming back, and I was ready to embrace it. After our coffee, I felt lighter, like I had just stepped out of the fog that had been surrounding me for months. I realized something important. I didn't need DIL's approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was worthy of love, success, and happiness, just as I was. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, into my goals, into rebuilding myself. The gym sessions became a routine. I felt stronger with every workout. My paintings started to look better, and I was beginning to see a clearer vision for my future. I reached out to old clients, reconnected with colleagues, and started working on projects that were meaningful to me. Slowly but surely, I was carving out a life that was my own. But there were still moments when the past crept in, when I felt weak, when I felt like I was being dragged down by the weight of everything. But I learned something important during those moments. I could choose how I responded. I could either let the past define me, or I could step forward into a new chapter. One night, as I sat on the couch, scrolling through social media, I saw a post from DIL. It was a picture of her with her new husband, celebrating their honeymoon in a tropical location. The caption read, "Living my best life." I stared at the post for a moment, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. She had no idea what I was going through, what I had been through. But the anger was fleeting, because in that moment I realized something. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her in my life anymore. I was living my best life now, and that was enough. It was that realization that sparked the final shift. I was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. I was no longer waiting for validation. I was doing it for myself. I was building a life that was mine, one step at a time. As I looked at the path ahead of me, I realized something else. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy. I had already proven it to myself. I smiled for the first time in what felt like ages, knowing that the future was mine to create. And I was ready for it. It's funny how life works. You think you're going down one path, only for it to veer in a completely unexpected direction. A few months ago, I would have never imagined where I'd be today, both physically and emotionally. But here I was, standing on the edge of something new, something bigger than I could have ever planned. The fog of betrayal was slowly lifting, and I was beginning to see the world again. A world that didn't revolve around Mark, DIL, or anyone else who had made me feel small. I woke up early on that Monday morning with a sense of determination. The sun was still low in the sky, and the house was quiet except for the sound of my feet on the hardwood floor as I walked to the kitchen. I hadn't felt this kind of energy in a long time. It was like a light had switched on inside me, a light I'd thought had burned out years ago. The first few steps into my kitchen were always the hardest, but today was different. I wasn't standing in the shadow of my past anymore. I had control over my own life, and I was going to make it count. I was going to do things for me, not for anyone else. As I brewed coffee, my mind wandered back to the moments that had led me here, to this point of clarity. The insults from DIL, the feeling of betrayal, the sharp sting of realizing that someone you loved had hurt you in such a profound way. But I had learned something important from that. It wasn't the hurt that defined me. It was how I chose to react to it that mattered, and I wasn't going to let that betrayal define my future. The morning passed quickly, and before I knew it, it was time for my meeting with my lawyer. I had been working on getting my business off the ground, but there were some legal formalities I needed to take care of. It was exciting and daunting at the same time. Starting over meant building something from scratch, but I was ready. As I drove to the office, the weight of everything I'd been through settled on my shoulders, but it wasn't the same weight as before. It was the kind of weight that came from overcoming challenges, not from being crushed under them. I was stronger than I had been yesterday, and the day before that. I arrived at the office and walked in, feeling a sense of purpose. This was my time to finally take control of my future, to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to succeed. My lawyer, Sarah, was already waiting for me when I entered her office. She greeted me with a smile, her warm presence immediately putting me at ease. We had worked together for months, and I had come to trust her completely. "Sarah, how are you?" she asked, settling in across from me at her desk. "I'm good," I said, sitting down and offering a small smile. "Actually, I'm better than good. I've decided to go full speed ahead with my business. No more waiting." Her eyes lit up and she leaned forward. "That's the spirit. You've got everything you need, Sarah. You just need to take that first step and run with it." I nodded. That's exactly what I'm going to do. We spent the next hour going over the legal aspects of setting up my business. I had no idea how much work it would take to get everything off the ground, but Sarah's guidance made it feel manageable. For the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt excited. And for someone who had spent years feeling like they were stuck in a rut, this was a huge change. By the time I left her office, I felt like I had a real plan. I wasn't just sitting around, hoping things would work out. I was making them happen. That evening, I sat down with Jake, and we talked about everything that had been going on. He had noticed the change in me, the new energy, the confidence. He could see it, even though I hadn't said much. He was smart like that. "Mom," he said as we sat together on the couch, "you've been really happy lately." I smiled at him, proud of how perceptive he was. "Yeah, buddy, I'm feeling better. Things are starting to fall into place." He nodded, his big brown eyes studying me. "You're doing great, Mom. I know you'll be okay." The simplicity of his words hit me harder than anything else had that day. Jake didn't need any explanation. He just saw me. He saw that I was changing, and he was proud of me for it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. That night, as I tucked him into bed, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm doing this for you, too. I want to show you what it means to be strong, to never give up. No matter what life throws at us, we can make it through together." He smiled, his eyes bright with trust. "I know, Mom, I believe in you." And with those words, I realized something else. This wasn't just about me. It was about showing Jake how to rise above the hard times. It was about giving him the confidence to face whatever challenges life threw at him. I wasn't just building my future, I was building a future for him too. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, late nights, and planning. I was starting to feel like I had a real grasp on things. I was doing it, building my own business, reclaiming my independence, and creating a future where I didn't need anyone's validation. But there were moments when I felt like I was on the edge of something new, something bigger. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it. One afternoon, I received a message that changed everything. It was from an old contact in the business world, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't even know if he would remember me, but I had worked with him on a few projects in the past. His message was short, but it got straight to the point. "Sarah, I've been following your work. I think you're onto something big. Let's talk. I think we can help each other." I read it twice, then set my phone down. My heart raced. This could be the opportunity I had been waiting for, but it also made me realize something. The old Sarah, the one who had let other people make her feel small, would have been scared to even respond. She would have doubted herself, second-guessed her worth. But not this Sarah. This Sarah had already made the choice to be confident, to embrace opportunities, no matter how big or intimidating they seemed. I quickly typed back a reply, arranging a meeting with him for the following week. The meeting with him was held at a sleek, modern office downtown. As I walked in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and nerves all at once. The man I was meeting was someone who had worked with major companies, someone who knew the ropes of the business world. But I wasn't intimidated. I had earned my place here. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes assessing me with a sharpness I didn't expect. "Sarah, good to meet you. I've been keeping an eye on your work. You're impressive." "Thank you," I said, sitting down across from him. "I've been working on something big, and I think you might be the right person to help me take it to the next level." We spent the next hour discussing everything, my business, my goals, and how we could potentially collaborate. The conversation flowed easily, and I could see the excitement in his eyes as we talked. It wasn't just talk anymore, it was real. I could feel the momentum building. By the end of the meeting, he had agreed to partner with me. He believed in my vision, and together, we would take my business to a scale I hadn't even dared to dream about. I left the meeting with a sense of exhilaration. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Things were falling into place, one step at a time. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and I was thriving. As I walked to my car, I thought back to the days when I had felt lost, when I had let DIL's words and Mark's neglect define me. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. And yet, I still couldn't shake the feeling of pride that washed over me. I had taken control of my life. I had decided that I would no longer be defined by the opinions or actions of others. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let anyone silence it. The future was bright, and I was ready for whatever it held. Later that evening, as I sat at home with Jake, I couldn't help but smile. I had built something for myself. I had faced the hardest moments of my life and come out stronger. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure: I was never going to stop fighting. For me, for Jake, for our future. The journey wasn't over, but I was walking it with my head held high. And nothing, not even the ghosts of my past, could take that from me. I had made it this far. I had survived the worst parts of my past, and I was finally in control of my future. But the journey wasn't over yet. I had learned that the road to healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't about one big victory that changed everything. It was about the small, consistent steps I took every day. It was about building a life that wasn't dependent on the approval of anyone else. Not Mark, not DIL, not anyone. But even though I had come so far, I still had doubts. There were moments when the past crept back in, when the insults, the hurt, and the pain returned like ghosts I couldn't shake. I wasn't immune to self-doubt. I still wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I had made the right decisions. But every time those feelings surfaced, I fought them back. I knew better now. It was one of those rare, quiet afternoons when I had a moment to reflect. Jake was at his friend's house, and I had the house to myself. It wasn't often that I got time alone, but today I embraced it. The silence was comforting in its own way, a reminder of how much I had grown. I walked into the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea. As I sipped it slowly, the weight of everything seemed to catch up with me. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change, and I hadn't allowed myself to fully process everything. But now, as I sat at the table, I realized how far I had come. I thought about the woman I had been before all this happened. The woman who let Mark's control dictate her every move, the woman who had hidden her true self in the shadows, afraid to stand up for who she really was. That woman felt so far away, like someone I barely recognized. And yet, there were days when I could still feel the echoes of her inside me. The fear, the uncertainty, the lack of confidence. But that wasn't me anymore. I was no longer a woman defined by someone else's opinion of me. I was no longer the person who shrank away from conflict, from confrontation, from standing up for myself. I was stronger than that. I was building a life that was mine, and mine alone. The next few weeks were filled with more work, more progress. I spent most of my days focusing on my business, networking, and pushing myself forward. But there were still moments when I couldn't help but think about Mark, about the things he had done, the ways he had tried to control me. I wasn't over the betrayal. It would take time to heal, but I was determined to keep moving forward. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer, Sarah. She had been helping me with some legal matters related to the business and my ongoing separation from Mark. The moment I heard her voice, I felt a sense of reassurance. She had been a constant support throughout this process, and I trusted her completely. "Sarah," I said, "what's going on?" "I've got some good news," she said, her voice full of excitement. "The final papers for your business registration have come through. You're officially in business, Sarah." I could hardly believe it. My hands shook slightly as I put the phone down. I had done it. I had turned my vision into a reality. The dream I had once only whispered to myself was now real. I had my own business. It was no longer just an idea, it was happening. "I'm really proud of you," Sarah continued. "You've worked so hard and it's paying off. This is just the beginning, Sarah. You're going to do great things." I smiled, my chest swelling with pride. "Thanks, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without your help." "Don't sell yourself short," she replied. "You did all the work. You took control of your life, and that's something no one can take away from you." That evening, I sat with Jake at the dinner table, sharing the news with him. He was ecstatic, as always, about my accomplishments. He was proud of me, and his support meant the world to me. He always had a way of making me feel like I could do anything, and I cherished that more than anything. "That's awesome, Mom," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "I knew you could do it." I laughed, feeling the warmth of his words in my heart. "Thanks, buddy, but I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock through all of this." He shrugged, his shy smile lighting up his face. "I'm just happy you're happy." The weeks that followed were filled with more small victories, more progress, and more moments of self-realization. I began to feel like I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be, the person I was always meant to be. But there were still moments when the ghosts of my past crept in. One day, I ran into Mark at the grocery store. It had been months since I had seen him, and the sight of him still sent a wave of emotion through me. He looked different, distant, like he was a stranger. He saw me and froze, as if he didn't know how to act. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Sarah," he said, his voice hesitant. "Hi." I nodded but didn't say anything. The awkwardness between us was palpable, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, but I didn't. I had moved past the anger, or at least I thought I had. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "I heard about your business. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I didn't know you had it in you." I looked at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. The old Sarah would have crumbled at his words. But the new Sarah, she didn't need his approval. She didn't need anything from him. "I'm doing great, Mark," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Better than I ever thought possible." He looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry for everything, Sarah. I know I hurt you." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence hang between us. I had heard his apologies before, and they had never been enough. I didn't need them anymore. I had learned to forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine. "I know, Mark," I said finally, "but I've moved on. I'm not the person I was when we were together, and I'm not looking back." He nodded, as if he finally understood. "I hope you find happiness, Sarah." "I already have," I said, turning away and walking down the aisle. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of needing Mark's validation, needing his apology, was gone. I had taken back control of my life. In the following months, I continued to grow my business, but more importantly, I continued to grow as a person. I spent more time doing the things that made me happy, painting, hiking, spending quality time with Jake, and most importantly, learning to love myself again. I took pride in the small victories, making my first hire, signing my first client, and learning to trust in my abilities. One Saturday morning, as Jake and I were sitting on the porch drinking hot chocolate, he looked up at me with a serious expression. "Mom, I know you've been through a lot," he said, his voice filled with concern. "But I think you're really happy now. I've never seen you smile so much." I smiled back at him, feeling my heart swell with love. "I am, Jake, I really am, and it's because of you. You remind me every day of why I have to keep going. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." He smiled, looking pleased with himself. "You're the best, Mom." I leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. "You're the reason I keep fighting, buddy, and I'm going to keep fighting for us, for both of us." Looking back at everything that had happened, I realized just how far I had come. I had been broken once, lost in the chaos of my own self-doubt and insecurity, but I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and now I was stronger than ever. There would still be challenges ahead. There would still be days when I felt unsure, when I doubted my path, but now I knew that I could handle whatever came my way. I had fought for my happiness, and I had learned to stand up for myself. And nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me. I had found my voice again, and I would never let it be silenced. Not by Mark, not by DIL, and certainly not by anyone else who tried to tear me down. I was living for myself now, and that was enough. With every step I took, I was no longer walking in the shadows. I was walking in the light, proud of who I had become. And as I looked at my future, I knew one thing for sure: the best was yet to come. It had been months since DIL's cruel words, and yet, each day felt like a step further away from the woman I had been before. The sting of her insult still lingered, but with every passing day, it became less of a wound and more of a scar, something that no longer defined me. I had gone from being devastated, doubting myself, to standing tall with a sense of purpose. And I wasn't about to let anything or anyone make me feel small again. I had made a decision. This was my life, and I was going to take charge of it. It was time to stop living for anyone else. Time to stop waiting for approval or validation from those who didn't matter. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and more than that, I was thriving. But even as I stepped into this new chapter, I knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never is. Every day brought new challenges, but I was ready for them. I had come too far to back down now. It was a cool Saturday morning when I received the message. It had come from an unfamiliar number, but the name on the screen made my heart race. Mark. I hadn't heard from him since the fallout. After everything that had happened, I had told myself that I didn't need him, didn't want to hear from him. I had been focused on moving on with my life, building my business, getting back to who I was before all the heartbreak and betrayal. And yet, there it was, his name flashing across my phone. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend that I hadn't seen the message. But there was another part of me, the part that had finally learned to face my fears head-on, that knew I couldn't avoid it forever. With a deep breath, I opened the message. "Sarah, I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you. I've made some mistakes, and I owe you an apology. I'm sorry for everything." My chest tightened as I read his words. The apology felt empty, like it had been said out of obligation rather than genuine remorse. But there was something else, something about the message that made me stop and think. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat there, staring at the screen, thinking about the years we had spent together. The highs and the lows, the laughter and the tears, the love that had once felt so real, so unwavering, and how quickly it had all crumbled. I realized then that it wasn't his apology I was waiting for. It wasn't about closure or forgiveness. I had already given myself that. What mattered now was whether or not I could truly move on from everything that had held me back. Later that day, I met up with Lily. She was the one person who had always been there for me, no matter what. When I needed advice or a listening ear, she was the first person I turned to. So, when I found myself questioning what to do about Mark's message, I knew I had to talk to her. We met at a cozy cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and vintage decor that gave it a quirky charm. The moment I walked in, I saw Lily sitting by the window, her laptop open in front of her as she sipped on a latte. "You look like you've been thinking for hours," she said, flashing a knowing smile as I sat down across from her. I laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You could say that. I got a message from Mark." Her eyebrows raised and she leaned in. "Mark, after everything that happened." I nodded. "Yeah," he apologized, "but I don't know what to do with it." Lily took a deep breath, her gaze serious but understanding. Sarah, you've been through so much already. You've built yourself back up from the ground. Do you really need his apology? Is it going to change anything for you? Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time worrying about what Mark thought of me, what he thought I deserved, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I needed. I didn't need his apology to move forward. I had already forgiven myself. It was time for me to reclaim my power. I don't need it, I said softly, a sense of clarity washing over me. I've already moved on. I've built a life without him, and I'm happy with where I am. Lily smiled, a proud glint in her eyes. Exactly. You've worked so hard to get here. Don't let anyone's past mistakes or apologies hold you back. You've got a future to build. Her words sank in deeply. I had spent so much time waiting for validation from others, from Mark, from DIL, from people who had never truly supported me. But I didn't need them. I had everything I needed within myself. Over the next few weeks, I made it a point to focus on what mattered: my business, my growth, my happiness. The more I worked on it, the more confident I became. I didn't need anyone else's approval to succeed. I was proving it every day. I started taking on more clients, expanding my services, and networking with people who were genuinely interested in my vision. My reputation began to grow. I was no longer just the girl who had been betrayed by her husband. I was a woman who had overcome obstacles, who had taken control of her life, and was carving out her own path. And the best part, I was finally doing it for me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else's approval. I wasn't afraid of failure because I knew that failure didn't define me. What mattered was the effort I put into my work, into my personal growth, into my future. One afternoon, I was at a networking event, surrounded by like-minded entrepreneurs who shared my passion for growth and success. I had always been nervous about these events in the past, too many unknowns, too many people I didn't know. But this time, I walked in with my head held high, my shoulders back, and a confident smile on my face. As I mingled with other business owners, I felt a sense of pride in the fact that I had built this from nothing. I had started with an idea and turned it into a reality. I wasn't the same woman I had been a year ago. I had changed, grown, and evolved. Towards the end of the event, I met a man who seemed genuinely interested in my work. He was successful in his own right and offered me some advice about expanding my business into new markets. As we talked, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunities that had come my way, the chance to work with people who believed in me, who saw the potential in my business. When the event ended, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. I had put myself out there, made new connections, and learned something new. I wasn't the shy, self-doubting woman I had once been. I was a businesswoman. I was confident in my abilities. I was ready for whatever came next. The next day, I was at the office, going through some emails when I saw a familiar name pop up in my inbox. It was from the businessman I had met at the networking event. He had attached some documents, potential opportunities for collaboration. I felt a surge of excitement as I opened the email. This could be the break I had been waiting for. I read through the proposal, my mind racing with possibilities. This was my chance to take my business to the next level. This was what I had worked for. I immediately responded, agreeing to meet and discuss the proposal further. But as I hit send, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the business deal. It was about me. I was no longer waiting for opportunities to come to me. I was going out and creating them. And that was the most empowering feeling of all. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, new clients, and expanding my business. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And in the process, I was finding more and more of myself. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I had proven to myself that I didn't need anyone else's validation. I was enough. I was capable. I was in control of my own future. And most importantly, I knew now that I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy. I had already proven it to myself. That evening, after a particularly successful day at work, I sat down with Jake at the kitchen table. He had been quieter than usual lately, and I knew something was on his mind. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "I'm really proud of you. You're doing amazing things." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "Thanks, buddy. That means more to me than you know." He looked up at me, his eyes full of admiration. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. I believe in you." And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing this for Jake, to show him that no matter what life throws at you, you can always rise above it. We were in this together. With a sense of peace settling over me, I realized that I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of. I had taken control. And no one, not even Mark or DIL, could take that away from me. I smiled, knowing that the best was yet to come. The weeks that followed the networking event felt like a whirlwind. I was no longer the person who hesitated at opportunities. I had become someone who took chances, who stepped outside her comfort zone without looking back. But even as I moved forward with my business and personal goals, I still had moments of doubt. It was a strange feeling, like part of me wanted to keep running, keep going after success, but another part of me was scared to stop. I had learned to embrace change, but sometimes change brought uncertainty. I found myself questioning whether I was truly ready for everything that was happening. But each time I doubted myself, I remembered how far I had come, how far I had fought to be here. And I wasn't going to stop now. One of the best decisions I made during this time was to reconnect with people I had lost touch with over the years. People who had always believed in me, who had seen potential in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. One of those people was Lily, who had become more than just a friend. She had become a mentor, someone who had always been there to push me forward when I didn't have the strength to push myself. Lily and I had grown closer over the years, but after my marriage, I had distanced myself from her. I had been too consumed by Mark, too caught up in the drama of trying to keep our lives together. But Lily, despite the distance, never once judged me. She just let me be, and when I was ready, she welcomed me back with open arms. One afternoon, we sat in the same cafe where we had met months ago. The place had a different feel this time. It wasn't just the warmth of the coffee or the cozy atmosphere. It was the fact that I was sitting across from her, a woman who had seen my struggles and my triumphs, and she was looking at me with pride in her eyes. "So, how's everything going with the business?" Lily asked, taking a sip of her tea. "I know things have been picking up." I smiled, the sense of pride I felt reflecting in my voice. "It's been incredible. I'm finally seeing the results of everything I've worked for. My clients are happy, and I'm starting to expand. I'm even thinking of hiring my first employee soon." Lily's eyes widened. "That's amazing, you're really doing it. You've worked so hard, Sarah. It's incredible to see." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a wave of accomplishment. I've worked hard, yes, but it wasn't just about the business. It's about me, too. It's about showing myself that I can do this, that I'm worthy of all the success that comes my way. She nodded, a knowing smile spreading across her face. "I've always believed in you, Sarah. You've always had that fire inside you, but you needed to believe in it yourself. You needed to take control." And she was right. I had always been strong, but I had spent too long hiding behind the belief that I needed others to validate me. It was only when I stopped waiting for approval that I truly started to thrive. The weeks that followed Lily's encouragement were filled with continued growth. My business grew, yes, but so did I. I was learning more about myself every day. I started taking more time to nurture my own well-being, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I took walks, meditated, read books on personal growth, and spent more time doing things that made me feel whole. I wasn't just focusing on building my career anymore. I was focusing on building a life I could be proud of. But even in the middle of all this progress, I couldn't help but feel a subtle tension lingering. The tension came from the fact that I had to face my past, once and for all. Mark still lingered in my thoughts. The emotional residue of our failed marriage wasn't something I could just sweep under the rug. It was a part of my story, and no matter how far I'd come, I still had to deal with the fact that he had been a huge part of shaping who I was, for better or worse. It was one of those rare, quiet moments when I found myself thinking about Mark again. Jake was at his friend's house for the weekend, and I was at home, finally allowing myself to rest. I had been pushing myself hard, but sometimes I needed these moments to process everything. I found myself thinking about the times Mark and I had shared, the good and the bad, the dreams we had built together, and the reality of how they had fallen apart. It was hard to admit, but a small part of me still missed him. Not the person he had become, but the person I thought he was when we first met. I missed the version of him who had made promises about our future. I missed the version of myself who believed in those promises. But I knew that the only way forward was to stop looking back. The man I had loved was not the man he had turned into, and I couldn't keep hoping he would come back to me. I had to let go of that idealized version of him. And that's when I decided I needed to see him. I needed to face this chapter once and for all. I needed to make peace with everything that had happened, even if it was just for my own closure. I arranged to meet Mark at a local cafe. It wasn't easy to set up. I was apprehensive about facing him, but I knew it was something I needed to do. I had to hear him out, and more importantly, I had to see if I could finally release the last of the anger and resentment I had been holding onto for so long. When I arrived at the cafe, I saw him sitting at a table near the window. His face was tired, but there was a softness in his eyes that made me pause for a second. For a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I had once fallen in love with. But then the reality hit. That man was gone. He stood when I walked up to him, his eyes searching mine for any sign of how I was feeling. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice hesitant. "I'm glad you agreed to meet. I wasn't sure if you would." I sat down across from him, keeping my distance. "I'm here because I need closure, Mark. I can't move on without it, and I need to hear from you directly." He nodded, looking down at the table. "I understand. I've thought a lot about what happened, about everything I did to you. I was selfish. I didn't appreciate you, and I took you for granted." I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering if this was the moment I would finally hear the words I had been waiting for. The words that would bring me peace. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he continued, his voice low. "I never should have treated you the way I did. You deserved better, and I regret the way I handled everything. I regret losing you." There it was, the apology I had wanted. But as I sat there, listening to him, I realized something important. The apology wasn't what I needed anymore. I didn't need him to say sorry for what happened. I had already forgiven him, and more importantly, I had forgiven myself. "I've already moved on, Mark," I said softly, my voice steady. "I've healed, and I'm not looking back. You and I were done. What we had is over, and I've come to terms with that." His expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "I understand. I think I've always known you would be better off without me. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for." "I am stronger now," I said, feeling the weight lift from my chest. "And I'm building a future I'm proud of. I don't need your approval anymore. I've found my voice again, Mark, and I'm not going to let anyone take that from me." Walking away from that cafe, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The conversation had been difficult, but it was exactly what I needed. I had finally closed that chapter of my life, and I could feel the last remnants of resentment slipping away. It was time to focus on what lay ahead, not what had been left behind. As I got into my car and drove home, I couldn't help but smile. I had taken control. I had taken the steps to rebuild my life. And now, with the past behind me, I was ready to embrace the future. The weeks that followed were filled with progress, both in my business and in my personal life. I continued to expand my company, and the recognition I received was beyond anything I could have imagined. But it wasn't just about success. It was about the freedom I had gained. The freedom to be myself, to chase my dreams, and to live the life I deserved. I had gone from the woman who had been afraid to speak up to the woman who was unapologetically herself. And every day, I was reminded that this was just the beginning. As I sat at my desk one evening, working on a proposal for a new client, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was Jake. "Hey, Mom, guess what?" he said, his voice full of excitement. "What is it?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "I got into that school I applied to, the one with the art program. They said they love my work." I couldn't contain the tears that welled up in my eyes. "That's amazing, Jake. I'm so proud of you." "I knew you would be, Mom. You always believed in me." And in that moment, I realized that everything I had done, everything I had fought for, was worth it. I had not only built a new life for myself, but for Jake too. And together, we were unstoppable. The future was bright, and I was ready for whatever it held. No longer afraid, no longer uncertain, I was walking confidently into a life that was mine to create. And I knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning.